You're standing at 28,000 feet on Mount Everest. You've been climbing through the night. Your oxygen is almost gone. Your legs feel like concrete. Every single step takes everything you have left. Ahead of you, the ridge narrows to almost nothing. On either side, a 10,000-foot drop into the Himalayas. The wind is pressing through every layer of clothing you're wearing. Your oxygen mask is starting to ice over at the seal. And then you stop, because there is a man sitting in the snow, not collapsed, not unconscious, sitting cross-legged, 2 feet from the edge of the drop. His jacket is unzipped to his waist. His arms are out of the sleeves. His chest is completely exposed to the Himalayan air. No oxygen mask, no gloves, no hat. He looks up at you calmly, and he says, "I bet you were surprised to see me here." The reason those climbers froze in place is because they had been told that man was already dead. The name was Lincoln Hall, the same man now sitting in front of them. Alive, lucid, apparently in the middle of getting changed, at 8,700 meters, after spending the night alone in the death zone with no oxygen, no food, no water, and no shelter. What happened to Lincoln Hall in the hours before that moment is one of the most documented, most medically inexplicable survival stories in the history of high-altitude climbing. Hall wasn't an amateur chasing a bucket list. He was 50 years old, Australian, 3 decades at altitude. In 1984, he was part of the first Australian expedition to attempt Everest's summit. The team made history, but Hall never reached the top. Illness stopped him a few hundred meters below the summit. He turned back and watched his teammates continue upward without him. For the next 22 years, that unfinished climb stayed with him. He raised a family, built a full life in the Blue Mountains of New South Wales, but Everest never left him. In 2006, at 50 years old, he went back. On the morning of May 25th, Lincoln Hall stood on the summit of Mount Everest. At 50, second attempt, highest point on Earth. For a moment, everything had gone perfectly. He reached the summit. But Everest has a reputation for waiting until the descent. And that's exactly when things started to fall apart. Hall's team left the summit early, 3 Sherpa guides, climbing down the Tibetan side, the North Face route. More daylight ahead of them. Oxygen still in the tanks. Every variable in their favor. Then, at around 8,600 meters on the descent, Hall slowed down. Then he stopped walking. Then he sat down. And he couldn't stand back up. At that altitude, you're inside what climbers call the death zone. The air has less than 1/3 the oxygen found at sea level. Your blood thickens. Your heart pounds just to keep you conscious. Your lungs burn with every breath. And the organ that suffers first is your brain. Without warning, the pressure inside the skull can spike. Fluid begins leaking directly into brain tissue. It's called cerebral edema. And what makes it so specifically dangerous is that the organ it attacks is the exact organ you need to understand you're dying. Hall began hallucinating. Not shadows, not confusion. Full hallucinations. He believed he was on a boat. He believed there were people nearby who didn't exist. He kept trying to lie down in the snow, kept losing consciousness completely. The Sherpas dragged him up every time he went down, shouted at him to keep moving, lifted his weight on the narrow ridge with the drop on either side. At one point, they pressed a pen against his eye to test for a reaction. Nothing. No blink, no flinch, no sign anyone was home. To every observable measure, Lincoln Hall was already gone. The Sherpas had been fighting to keep him alive for hours, dragging him, lifting him, pleading with him. But now they were deep in the death zone themselves. Their oxygen gauges were reading empty. Snow blindness was setting in, the brutal white blur that comes from UV radiation at altitude, with nothing between your eyes and the sun. Night was coming. And on Everest, darkness in the death zone with no oxygen usually means nobody comes back. Then the radio crackled. The message came from base camp. Leave him. Get down. Save yourselves. It wasn't cruelty, it was survival arithmetic. The Sherpas hesitated. They had spent the entire afternoon trying to save him, but staying meant dying beside him, and there was nothing left to give. So they made the decision that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. They began removing Lincoln Hall's gear, his oxygen bottle, his water, his food, his headlamp, his spare clothes, everything he would need to survive the night, because they were certain he wouldn't need any of it. Then they walked away from Lincoln Hall and started down the mountain. Hall was officially declared dead at 5:20 p.m. The statement spread through the climbing world within the hour. By nightfall, the news had reached Australia, but something strange was happening high above the earth, because Lincoln Hall did not die. Not that night, not the next morning. When the sun rose over Everest the following day, Lincoln Hall was still there, still breathing, still sitting on the side of the highest mountain on Earth, and nobody knew it. Hall spent nearly 30 hours total in the death zone. His mind was completely fractured. He wasn't drifting in and out. He was fully inside the hallucination, convinced he was on a boat, trying to find a way off it. The terrifying part was that the exit he imagined was a 3,000-meter drop off the mountain, Kangshung Face. Somewhere underneath all of that, something else was running. Hall had practiced Buddhist meditation and yoga breathing for years. He later said those patterns kept firing on their own, below the level of conscious thought, while his mind was somewhere else entirely. He described feeling death come toward him, not violently, not as something to be afraid of. In his own words, death is not the grim reaper, it's more welcoming. It's actually just the next phase. He imagined it as a gray cloak settling around his shoulders, and something deep inside him refused to put it on. The temperature that night held at around -25 degrees Celsius, cold enough to kill, but not the -40 Everest is capable of. The wind stayed relatively calm. Two details, both completely outside his control. That may have been the only reason he was still there when the sun came up. On the morning of May 26th, 4 climbers were moving up the same route. American guide Dan Mazer, Canadian climber Andrew Brash, British climber Miles Osborne, and Jangbu Sherpa from Nepal. Each of them had spent years working toward this summit. This was their window. Then Osborne saw something just below the second step. A man, sitting upright in the snow, bare chest, no gloves, no oxygen, 2 feet from a 10,000-foot drop. They recognized him immediately. They'd had the radio message the night before. Hall looked up. "I bet you were surprised to see me here." The summit was finished the moment they saw him. No debate, no hesitation. For the next 4 hours, they used their own oxygen. The oxygen meant to get them to the top and back, keeping Lincoln Hall alive. Got him back into his jacket, got his hat on, got him to his feet. Mazer explained the decision in 5 words. The summit will always be there. Slowly, step by step, they guided Hall down the mountain. He was still hallucinating, still barely aware of what was happening, but he was moving. At the North Col, a Russian expedition doctor was waiting. Hall walked the final stretch himself. He reached advanced base camp the next day. He was alive. He lost the tips of several fingers and a toe to frostbite. Hall returned to Australia. He lived another 6 years. In 2012, Hall died from a rare form of cancer. 10 days before Hall was found on that ridge, a British climber named David Sharp had sat down in the snow on the same mountain. Alive, conscious. Over 40 climbers passed him. Sharp died where he sat. 2 men, same mountain, same season. Both found alive beyond any point where survival made sense. One came down, one didn't. Nobody can fully explain either outcome. Not the survival, not the death. Medicine doesn't have a clean answer for what Hall's body did that night. And there's no simple explanation for why Sharp's story ended differently. Everest doesn't kill you, the circumstances do. And on the same mountain, in the same week, the circumstances couldn't have been more different.